Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now, sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. I was halfway through restocking the chip aisle when the radio under the counter cut off the oldies station mid-chorus. 2 solid tones held for a few seconds, high, then higher, like a warning siren trying to squeeze through a small speaker. I glanced up from the box cutter, blinked at the fluorescent lights humming above the coffee bar, and waited. The tones clicked out. A flat voice came in, the kind that sounds like it was recorded in a windowless room. This is an activation of the emergency alert system for our listening area. Please stand by for an important bulletin from local authorities. The wind pressed at the front door and rattled our home-printed lottery poster against the glass. Outside the windows, 2 pumps, a lonely 2-lane ribbon of state highway, the gravel shoulder rolling off toward a line of maples and dark pasture land beyond. On most nights, you could see a pair of headlights every 5 or 10 minutes. Tonight, there had been none for a while. Probably another silver alert, I called toward the counter where the coffee was steaming. Or those test messages the county pushes when the weather radio gets bored. Derek laughed from outside. He was finishing a fill on his tractor-trailer parked by the second pump, a long white refrigerator trailer that said Hutton Produce in peeling green letters. The man had the posture of a long-time driver, one shoulder lower from habit, a faded trucker cap pulled down to shade his eyes from our canopy lights. He'd been on the road since Boise, hauling lettuce bound for a distribution center outside Pittsburgh. He said he liked our station because the coffee didn't taste like it had been left in the pot since daylight. If that's a test, it's the first time I've heard one at 11:30 at night, he said over his shoulder. Finish your chips, Chief. I'm paying. Then crashing behind the store for a couple hours. I'm not your chief, I said, but he was already walking toward the door. A little bell above the door announced him. He brought cold air in with him and a smear of road dust around the edges of his high-visibility jacket. He carried a crowbar tucked into a leather loop on his belt, the kind you use for prying pallets into place. It looked heavy and well-used. He told me once that carrying it was half habit and half cheap insurance against broken seals and stubborn trailer latches. 212 at pump 2, he said, tapping his card against the reader. He watched the little green light blink and then breathed into his hands. Cold dropped 5 degrees since the last county line. Feels like it anyway. The radio crackled again. We interrupt programming to deliver the following message. Local law enforcement urges residents to remain indoors. There are multiple reports of violent incidents in the county. If you're at home, secure your doors and windows. If you're traveling, avoid major roads and populated areas and seek shelter. Do not approach individuals who appear confused, disoriented, or unresponsive. Law enforcement and emergency services are experiencing high call volumes. Stay tuned for updates. Derek gave me a look. Violent incidents? That's the vaguest I've ever heard him. Probably some fight downtown, I said, but I felt the small hairs on my forearms react. The wind grabbed the canopy again and dropped a handful of leaves against the glass. The clock over the cigarettes read 11:36 p.m. The ice chest by the door sighed and clicked. Across from the coffee area, in the corner by the phone charger rack, a girl in a worn canvas jacket stood with a charging cable running to the outlet strip under the snack shelf. She had been there when my shift started, nodding to me with that universal look of tired travelers who don't want to be asked questions. A backpack leaned against her leg, the chest strap clipped and zippers cinched. Her sneakers were caked with mud, like she'd been dropped into the night from a hiking trail. She looked up now, too. I heard a different one on my phone before I lost signal, she said. around 10:30. It said there were disturbances at the hospital in Elm Creek and to stay away. I figured some prank. "You hitching?" Derek asked, not unkindly. His tone had that trucker's calculus to it. "Can I help? Is this safe? What's my clock? What's my load temperature?" She nodded. "Got picked up by a sushi chef and dropped at the county line. He said the radio was acting weird all day. I was going to try for the Greyhound in the morning." The heater clicked to life above the door, pushing a gentle droning warmth out across the tidy floor I'd mopped at 9. If you kept your eyes at counter height, our place could pass for new. Clean coffee pots, a few rotating hot dogs, decent shelves. But if you looked up, you saw the acoustic ceiling tiles stained by old roof leaks. And if you looked down into the space between bottom shelves and the base molding, you saw the scuffs of a building that had seen too many winters. We had a fenced propane tank out back with the chain lock that stuck in cold weather. We had a breaker panel by the office with a faded label that said "Exterior Lights" and another that said "Dispensers Main." We had an emergency pump shutoff button under a red flip cover on the wall by the door. If I leaned around the cigarette rack, I could see the shadowed lot and the canopy with its 4 buzzing tubes. Another car didn't come. Another 10 minutes passed. The radio repeated the bulletin. I made eye contact with Derek. We both listened to the words not being said, and then our eyes slid to the girl by the chargers. "What's your name?" I asked, because this felt like a moment where strangers either left it awkward or pulled it closer. "Jess," she said. "I'm Nate," I said. I raised an eyebrow at Derek. "Derek," he said, and then, "I'm going to use the restroom and then park my rig behind the dumpster where it's dark. You got a back lot, Jess. Could try to catch a nap in the shelter of the station if things are getting weird." "I'll make a space in the stockroom," I said, surprising myself. "It's warmer than the bench outside." He hesitated. "If this is that thing that was on the news last week in other states, you might not want company," he said carefully. "Heard stories, folks acting wrong, some disease, don't want to be the one that brings trouble to your door." The radio hissed and the voice came back before I could reply. "If you must travel, do so in small groups with at least one adult capable of defensive measures. If you have access to a vehicle, ensure you have fuel and supplies to last at least 72 hours. Turn off exterior lighting if it draws attention. This is a rapidly evolving situation." Jess looked at me. "Turn off the lights," she said. I glanced at the breaker panel by the office door. Old metal, gray paint chipped. I knew which toggles controlled what. We had the canopy lights labeled Sector A and Sector B. The exterior flood on the back lot was labeled Backyard. I'd never thrown the whole thing to dark in the middle of a shift, but I could. "Hold on," I said. I stepped to the wall and flipped the red cover on the emergency shutoff. The button under it was big as a quarter and labeled Emergency Fuel Pump Shutoff. I didn't push it. That was only for spills or fire. Instead, I opened the breaker panel and flipped Exterior Lights A, then B. The canopy went dark. The reflection of our own interior lights leapt back at us in the glass and then dimmed as my eyes adjusted. It was stranger than I'd expected, standing in a convenience store lit like a normal night while the world outside went to ink. The absence of our own light gave depth to the road and made the trees feel closer. The hum of the canopy died and the wind took the soundscape for itself. "Good call," Derek said, half in the restroom hallway, half out. "Less of a beacon." He was a step from the bathroom door when a light crossed the front windows. 2 beams, one high, one low. An engine idled rough, sputtered, then died. Somewhere between our lot and the black highway, a car had coasted to a stop and let its headlamps slide down into weak arcs. We all went still. "Nate," Derek said softly. I was already moving to the counter where the baseball bat lived under the lottery pads and the roll of deli paper. The bat had given us peace of mind since we took over the station from the previous owners. We never had to use it for anything worse than a stray raccoon in the dumpster, but it had the weight of reassurance. "Stay back," I said to Jess. "Derek, don't open that door unless we're both ready." We stood like that for a long beat, looking at each other's faces, looking at the dark rectangle of the outside world. Then the headlights stuttered out completely. A shape stepped into the glass. It was a man in his 50s or 60s wearing a service station jacket like mine, but shredded down one sleeve. He hit the glass with his palm, hard enough to start the bell over the door ringing as if the door had opened, even though it hadn't. He left a smear on the pane and dragged his hand down, fingers clawed. He stared past us into the light. His mouth worked soundlessly and his eyes were wrong, unfocused but locked on brightness like a moth. He pressed again. His knee buckled and he slid. Derek said, "Hey sir, we can help you," and reached for the handle. "Wait," I said, but it came out too slow. The bell banged hard as the door flexed and then opened inward because Derek was strong and the man wasn't. The stranger fell into the entry and hit the mat. He didn't say anything. He didn't make the noise people make when they're hurt. He just flopped and then started to push himself up like a person getting up from a nap on a couch they didn't mean to take. His jacket brushed the threshold. I saw the inside of his forearm then and found a row of deep, unmistakable crescent marks where someone's teeth had been. He smelled like rain damp and sour sweat and something sharp that made my throat want to close. "Sir," Derek said, stepping in, crowbar sliding free, "you're hurt. Sit tight." Jess made a small sound behind the coffee rack. I tightened my grip on the bat. The man reached for Derek's leg, not clumsy the way a person in shock might, but with a sudden, specific snap that made Derek grunt and stumble to keep his balance. I stepped in and used the bat to hook the man's shoulder. "Back," I said to Derek. And then we both froze because the man's grip on Derek's pant leg didn't feel like a leftover reflex. It had purpose. "Sir," I said, and I heard my own voice go formal. "We're going to help you. I need you to let go." He didn't. He made a sound then, low and continuous, something I felt in my bones because it didn't change even when I shouted. That's what stuck with me. He wasn't reacting to us as people. He was reacting to light and warmth and motion as if we were all the same thing. Derek did the obvious then. He placed the crowbar against the man's forearm and pried his fingers back, one by one, with the measured strength of a man who'd done similar things 1,000 times with frozen straps and rusted hinges. He didn't hit him. He set a wedge, leaned, and broke the grip. When the stranger's hand came free, Derek stumbled backward and the man turned toward me as if on a swivel. His eyes tracked the lit rectangles behind me, coolers, coffee, the glowing LED strip over the lottery counter. "Nate?" Jess said from the coffee corner, choking the word down to a ghost. "It's okay," I told her without looking her way. "Bathroom," I said to Derek, and he understood. We backed. The man crawled with sudden speed, then clambered, rising into an awkward, stiff-legged stand, and then he was moving toward me down the aisle between the jerky and the beef sticks. He didn't even try to step around the rotating display. He walked straight into it and knocked it spinning, packs pinging the floor. He kept coming. I've never been a fighter. I've had my nose bloodied precisely once in high school and learned quickly that I didn't like it. But there's a point where your body takes over because there's no time to weigh anything else. When the stranger lunged, I brought the bat up and put it across his shoulders and pushed him into the freezer case, hard, using every pound of my weight. The glass thunked, the bat flexed. The man didn't feel the bruise the way a sober stranger would have. He struggled like a person trying to reach a light switch, unbothered by the force. fingers clawing for the warm part of the room. "Bathroom," I said again. And then, "Now." Derek moved in short, efficient steps, crowbar down, hands up, watching for a grab. We started to slide along the aisle, trying to get past him to the hall. The man pivoted, fixed on Jess's phone light for a second, then fixed back on me. I felt the cold through the freezer glass. I saw Derek's wide eyes and the small quiver at the corner of his mouth. Then the stranger lunged again. We didn't have time to be better people. We didn't have time to explain that we didn't want to hurt him. I shoved harder with the bat. Derek stepped in and used the flat of his crowbar like a bar on a dock and levered the man sideways into the end cap. The movement was clean and practiced. The stranger's shoulder hit the end cap hard enough to knock the breath out of me even though it wasn't my shoulder. He sagged. We moved. We made the hallway. The restroom doors were on one side, and the stockroom door on the other with the swing latch. Derek stepped into the men's room and then made a face. "Hold on," he said. And I heard the lock slide home from the inside and then the scrape of him climbing out through the little window we kept propped for airflow. The man at the end of the aisle hit the end cap again, not slowed by pain, just redirected. He came on. "Jess," I said, "back room." She was there, hands grabbing the swing latch before I could. We slipped into the stockroom, closed it, and shot the bolt. We both stood with our backs to the door, breathing hard, listening to the steady, soft hum of the walk-in cooler and the distant, wrong shuffle of shoes on tile outside. Derek opened the back door crack and hissed, "It's clear," and then shimmied back in through the window and slapped the men's room lock open with a quick reach. He rejoined us in the stockroom 2 seconds later, breathing quietly, his hand on his thigh where the stranger had grabbed him. "You okay?" I said. His eyes flicked to me. "Got a little scrape," he said, like it was nothing. The air moved in his chest a half step too fast. "We need to lock the front and kill the interior lights." I nodded and pointed to the breaker box in the stockroom that fed the office lights. I picked out the row labeled Store Main and turned them down until only the aisle fixtures nearest the register glowed. The store dimmed, not dark, but enough that the windows turned into mirrors. Jess stood with her backpack on, hands gripping straps, chin up. "He's not right," she said, stating the thing we were all trying to put better words to. The bell above the front door rang again. This time, it was not because the door opened. It was because something heavy hit the glass and flexed it enough to jostle the bell arm. "Front," Derek said. "We can't leave him there." I didn't say what flashed through my head, that he was a person, not a him there, and that a person's mother or father might be somewhere checking their watch and waiting for a car that wouldn't arrive. It wasn't that those thoughts weren't true. They were true in a way that didn't help. "You two stay here," I said. "I'll go around through the office, use the shutter." We had a roll-down security shutter for the front windows, a leftover from a break-in years ago. The crank for it lived under the counter. I moved down the hallway, kept my boots quiet on the tile, and peered around the corner. The stranger stood in the middle of the aisle, head cocked toward the coolers behind the register like he was listening for a sound only he could hear. His hands hovered at his sides, fingers trembling as if tuned to a frequency that only existed inside his skull. The bell rang again, softer, as if he'd twitched the door with his shoulder. I kept my profile narrow and slid behind the counter. The shutter crank took too many turns. It always had. I clamped my mouth and kept turning. 1 rotation, 2, 3, my shoulder began to burn and I kept going, willing the edges of the metal to meet the tile quickly. The shutter dropped slow, like it was underwater. The man turned his head toward me at the sound, then stepped toward the movement. I cranked faster. The shutter bottom kissed the floor. I slid the latch pins into place one by one. When the second pin engaged, the man hit the shutter with his open palm. It boomed like a drum. The metal didn't give much, but it sounded like we'd locked ourselves in a storage locker. I killed the remaining interior aisle lights. The store fell into a twilight of cooler glow and register LED. The man hit the shutter again, then changed direction, drawn by the beer cooler light, walking until his fingers met glass and then smearing them across. His jacket brushed the bumper of the snack display. He didn't stop to look at the "Hello, my name is" gift card stand. He didn't do any of the things a person in pain does to get help. He moved as if the world had been sketched in very lightly and the only dark lines left were heat and light. Derek's hand landed on my shoulder. "Bathroom door, lock him," he whispered. "You want to lure him into the men's room. Better than letting him bounce around out here," he said. "He makes noise, he draws eyes. We put him somewhere with a door we can control." It was crude, and it was what we had. We positioned ourselves. I tossed a roll of paper towels down the hallway to make a soft thump in that direction. The man turned, head cocked to the floor like the sound was in the tile. He moved down the aisle, slow at first, then faster as he left the cooler light and came into the darker register glow. I moved backward, keeping just enough space that he would keep coming. We stepped into the hall and past the men's room, lit by the emergency nightlight above the mirror. I hit the light switch so the little room glowed. The man accelerated. He stepped toward the light, into the threshold, and Derek's hand shot past my shoulder and snagged the door edge and slammed it. The latch clicked. The man's shoulder hit the inside hard enough to bow the hollow door skin, and then the lock caught and held. We stood together for a count of 20, breathing. The man pushed once more, and then the pressure against the door stopped. We could hear the faint shuffle of his shoes on the tile and the whisper of his sleeve against the painted wall, as if he were tracing the edge of the mirror. Jess's voice came soft. "He's trapped." "For now," Derek said. "Bought us quiet." I wrote on a sticky note, my hand steadier than my stomach felt. "Man in men's. Hurt. Do not open." I stuck it to the door at eye level. It wasn't for us. It was for some future where a different shift, a different stranger, would need to know our logic. The radio clicked again. "The county sheriff's office advises residents to avoid contact with anyone exhibiting aggressive behavior and to shelter in place. Do not attempt to transport injured persons to the hospital unless directed by authorities. Reports indicate high volumes of callers and delayed response times. Repeat, shelter in place." Derek winced and rubbed his thigh. The denim there was torn in a long, ugly smear, like fabric turned to threads by a sharp corner. His skin was visible underneath, a set of parallel scrapes and a bite above them. It wasn't torn open in the way that sets off every alarm bell, but the half-moon marks were there, unmistakable under the harsh hallway light. "Derek," I said. He met my eyes. He was a man who had years of experience with machines that don't forgive mistakes. He saw my look and nodded. "Bathroom," he said. "I'll wash it. We'll clean it with something. You got the first aid kit?" I was already moving. The kit was under the sink in the stockroom bathroom, the one we kept locked so it didn't become a community shower. I fished out the plastic case, cracked it open. Alcohol wipes, sterile gauze, tape, little smear tubes of antibiotic ointment. We weren't a clinic, but we checked the kit every month. I brought it to him. He sat on the closed lid of the toilet in the back bathroom, jaw clenched, jaw muscles jumping. He didn't complain. He didn't make a joke. He just held his own jeans out of the way while Jess and I cleaned the area with sterile saline and then alcohol. He hissed only once and gripped the sink hard enough to make the metal creak. We dressed it neatly with gauze and tape. "Bathroom next door is going to have a tenant," I said, as evenly as I could. "You should use this one for the night." It felt like a weak joke, and I let it fall. He nodded. He didn't look at the other bathroom door when we left. The sticky note sat there like a warning flag. We reconvened in the stockroom. The back door was closed. The door bolt slid. Jess leaned her backpack against a stack of paper towel cases and kept her hands busy by organizing the first aid kit, then reorganizing it just to move. "We should secure the front more," she said. "If there are more." "We have the shutter," I said. "We can push the coolers and the shelf units in front of the windows from the inside. We can tape the glass to keep it from shattering into pieces if it breaks." She nodded, already reaching for the packing tape gun we used on shipments. "Crisscross pattern? Like a hurricane tape job?" "Exactly," I said, grateful for a task that was simple, tangible, and right. "And we should cut the interior lights to minimum and keep the cooler doors closed so they don't broadcast like a sign." We moved together then. Jess taped the glass in big X's. Derek used the crowbar to slide the heavy drink cooler a few inches at a time until it wedged against the bottom of the shutter with its weight braced on the tile. I locked the POS drawer for the first time during a shift, not because I thought anyone was going to come in and demand cash, but because it was a small checkbox in a chain of checkboxes that made a thing feel handled. I flipped the breaker for the backlot flood and let the storage rooms go dusk. The world outside the glass felt like a presence then. Wind took the leaves in little rushes. Somewhere down the highway a horn leaned on and held, and then died to silence. The radio cycled the message on a 15-minute loop. On the third loop, the wording shifted. "There are multiple confirmed incidents of individuals exhibiting violent behavior and a lack of normal pain response. Law enforcement is attempting to establish a perimeter around the county seat. If you are in a rural area, you are advised to remain where you are. Do not drive towards populated areas." Jess stared at me. "This started somewhere else," she said. "But now it's here." Derek checked the lock on the back door twice. He tested the bolt with an engineer's patience, putting his shoulder into it at different angles. "If this is happening out on the highway," he said, "we can't count on help." "Agreed," I said. "We need to inventory what we have and what we can use." I did the thing I knew how to do. I took stock. On a notepad from the counter I listed water, food, tools, light sources, fuel, and first aid. Bottled water, 2 cases behind the soda, 4 gallons in a crate. Canned soup, chili, beans. Shelf bread that would go stale but still be edible. Peanut butter, crackers. 2 ABC fire extinguishers, 1 behind the counter, 1 by the back door. 1 K-class under the hot food area that we almost never used. Flashlights under the counter. 4 headlamps in a bin by the hunting licenses. Batteries. 2 rolls of heavy contractor bags. A coil of nylon rope in the supply closet. Duct tape. A few cheap ponchos. Plastic gloves. Affordances of a store run by practical people who had once made a list like this for a storm and never took the list down. "Propane," Jess said. "We have 20-pound cylinders in the caged rack by the dumpster," I said. "And the big above-ground ASME tank behind the chain link on the back lot that feeds the heat and the water heater. The caged cylinders are exchange stock for customers. The big tank is ours. The lock on that fence is frozen half the time. Fire risk," Derek said. "Agreed," I said. "We don't move those unless we have to. We keep ignition sources away. No open flames, no cigarettes, no sparks." He gave me a little side look with the tiniest smile as if to say, "You think I need that speech?" But he didn't object. He pulled the battery from a lantern and set it aside, a symbol of the new rules. "What about vehicles?" Jess said. "We have his truck." "I have an old Civic around back," I said. "Half tank. Enough for a few towns if the roads are clear. The keys are in my pocket." "Keys to the semi are in my jacket," Derek said. "But driving it out of here will make more noise than a parade. If these folks are drawn to noise and lights, we might as well hang a sign that says, 'Here we are.'" We fell quiet. Through the thin stockroom wall, we could hear the man in the restroom shift and bump lightly against tile. Derek stared at the wall for a long second and then shook himself like a man resetting a thought he didn't want to ride. "Radio," he said. "CB in my rig. Might have chatter, and the tractor will have a jump pack and a basic toolkit." "Exterior lights are down," I said. "Back door opens to dark." "Dark is good," Jess said softly. "We don't want attention." We set up a routine, because routines are what keep hands steady. Jess and I would hold the back door. Derek would slip to his truck with a headlamp turned to red light so it didn't carry. We agreed on a knock pattern to get back in. 3 quick, 2 slow. We all practiced it on the wood so nobody would panic when they heard it. We counted down, opened the bolt, and let the night in. The back lot felt like a different world, as if our little store was a spacecraft docked at the edge of a black ocean. The stars were bright because the canopy was down. The grass beyond the gravel swayed like a lake surface under wind. The highway off to the right was a dark ribbon. Derek slid along the wall in a low, efficient crouch, footsteps careful. He disappeared around the corner. We waited. Jess held the bolt handle, knuckles white. I held the fire extinguisher in my left hand and the bat in my right. The cold got into the place where my shirt hadn't been tucked quite far enough into my belt. The night smelled like leaves and diesel. Derek reappeared 2 minutes later with a plastic box in one hand and his CB in the other, its antenna angled down. He knocked the pattern. Jess threw the bolt. I opened the door just wide enough and let him slide through. We shut it, set the bar, and held our breaths as our hearing adjusted from the open black to the fluorescent hum. "Got the CB, a jump pack, and a first aid pouch," he said. "Left the door to the cab cracked so I don't lock myself out like a rookie." He set the radio on the desk, pushed the power, and the little backlit screen glowed. He turned the squelch up until the hiss flattened and then backed it down until it sat just on the edge of noise. He thumbed through channels. Mostly, there was nothing. Every few channels there was the whisper of a distant carrier and then a voice cut in at the edge of range. "Eastbound lot of folks on foot, avoid the ramps." "No response on 9, repeat, no response. If you can hear me, stay home." We listened until words stopped sounding like words and became salt on the tongue. Derek leaned back in the office chair and closed his eyes for 3 seconds, and then opened them again because he didn't trust the feeling that waited when he shut them. "Okay," I said. "We hold here. We keep quiet. We wait for daylight." "And if those headlights on the highway were a pile-up," Jess said, "daylight might bring more." "We'll see it coming," I said. "We have sight lines. And we have a plan to shelter." Derek nodded once, a firm dot to end a sentence. "I'll take first watch by the shutter," he said. "I want to be the one who hears if anyone comes up on us." "You need to rest," I said. "I'll rest later," he said. And it was not a challenge but a fact. We rotated in 2-hour blocks we couldn't keep to because none of us, it turned out, was capable of sleep. I closed my eyes for 10 minutes on the paper towel cases and dreamed I was counting boxes, but the count kept skipping and I woke up on the same number again and again. Jess sat cross-legged with the headlamp off and a pen in her hand, writing on her own notepad with quick, slanted letters in the near dark. Derek stood by the shutter hearing memories of old night shifts and new noises layered over. At 1:12 a.m. by the register clock, the horn sounded again from the highway, and this time it was closer. Not at the junction, not by somebody else's cornfield, near our lot, maybe 100 yards east, maybe less. It was the sound of a hand slamming onto a steering wheel and holding in a blind appeal. We moved together without needing to say anything. Jess to the back door bolt, me to the fire extinguisher, Derek to the shutter crank. He raised the shutter only enough to see under, 2 inches, then 3. The world outside was still a graphite sketch, but between us and the highway, the gravel drive that curved into our lot was suddenly crowded with shapes. Headlights glared for a second and then cut out. A car slid in nose first and hit the concrete stop at the pump with a muffled thunk. The driver's door swung. A woman scrambled out, stumbled, and caught herself. A child rose in the back seat and pressed hands to the window glass. 3 more shapes came into the edge of our view, not out of any car, out of the darkness along the highway shoulder. They moved quickly, on a straight vector toward our lit rectangle, feet soundless on gravel, heads forward. The woman didn't look at them. She was looking at the shutter where Derek crouched and at the light leaking around the edges. "It's people," Jess whispered. "We have to let them in." I didn't move at first. There was a man in our men's room with a sticky note on the door. There was a smear on our entry glass. There was a bandage under Derek's jeans. There was 1,000 miles of what-ifs between the front of our shutter and the safety we had talked ourselves into. And there was a child pressing hands to a window, eyes wide and not understanding any of it. "Okay," I said, and heard the change in my own voice. "We do this fast. Derek, you open and close. Jess, you and I run out and cover the lady and the kid to the door. We don't hesitate." Derek's eyes met mine. He read everything I was trying not to show and nodded. He raised the shutter another 12 inches. He put one hand on the crank and one on the latch pin, ready to drop it if the wrong thing came through. "2 in," he said. "No more." "2 in," I agreed. He brought the shutter up enough that a person could duck and slide under. The woman saw the movement. She shouted something I didn't even hear because in that instant, one of the figures came within the cone of our cooler light, and its face snapped into clarity. I didn't know the person, young, baseball cap, hoodie, but the posture was the same as the man in our hallway. The same wrong set of the shoulders, the same fixed heat-seeking focus on the light, the same lack of startle when a car door slammed near them. "Go," I said to Jess, and we ran. We crossed the gap in 5 strides, the gravel hissing under our shoes. The night air cut with the smell of spilled gasoline from the car's overfilled tank. The woman turned to us, tears cutting tracks down road grit. She reached for Jess's arm and held like a person stepping from one boat into another in a storm. I pivoted toward the back door of the car and opened it. The child was 9 or 10, a boy in a soccer hoodie with a backpack hugged to his chest. He recoiled at my suddenness and then moved when I said, "Inside now, move," with a tone that brooks no argument. We hustled them to the shutter. Derek had it held shoulder high. The woman ducked and went under. The boy slid, backpack catching, and Derek snagged the strap with one hand and yanked him the last foot. I followed close enough that the shutter brushed my back. Jess came in last and Derek dropped the metal like a guillotine. The boom it made when it hit tile was final, in a way that made all of our hearts thud once against our ribs. Outside the shutter, the figures changed direction and gathered. They didn't pound on the metal and demand entry. They paced, searching for the cracks of light, their hands reaching for the seams between slats where the air warmed. The woman pressed a hand to her chest, swallowed a sob, and then let it go. The boy looked too much like he might cry and held it down, eyes landing on the candy rack, on the coffee machines, on the little things that stood for normal night in a small store. Jess guided them back toward the stockroom while I kept my eyes on the bottom edge of the shutter, and Derek kept his hand on the crank. We listened. The pacing outside steadied. Gravel shifted in slow arcs. Another set of footsteps, then another, not steady like a group arriving together, but drifting in like leaves in water. The herd wasn't loud. That's what shook me most. They didn't shout, didn't scratch at the metal, didn't show off for any camera. They just existed where the warmth was and stayed. Derek muttered a wordless sound and rolled his shoulders once, and the movement made him wince. I put a hand on his arm and he nodded that he knew. We moved back to the stockroom, where the woman and the boy stood with Jess under the hum of the cooler fan like a family in an airport who had found the gate but lost the plane. "I'm Kara," the woman said immediately, like a person used to solving problems by starting conversations. "This is Liam. We came from Elm Creek. The road in was a mess. People were in the intersection when the light turned green and nobody moved. A fire truck drove through the grass. I drove around the stop sign because no one was stopping. I thought this place was closed, but then I saw the light and "You're safe for now," I said, keeping my voice even. "We're going to keep it that way." She nodded too fast. "I saw people on the shoulder. They were—" She cut herself off and looked at Liam. "We just need a minute." Jess gave Liam a bottle of water and a sleeve of plain crackers from an open case. He took them with solemn care and peeled the corner of the plastic like it was an exam. Kara looked at us with needing eyes. "Do you have a police number?" "We tried to call. It just rang." "The radio says to shelter in place," I said. "They're overwhelmed." She swallowed. She saw Derek's bandage. She saw the sticky note on the bathroom door when her eyes flicked that direction in the way people do when they're cataloging a room for exits, resources, and threats. She said nothing about either thing, and I liked her for that. "Okay," she said, as if the 3 letters could be a foundation. "Okay." We put them in the stockroom proper, away from the shutter and away from the men's room. I brought a case of water and set it down. Jess made a corner out of folded moving blankets from our last inventory shipment and a stack of toilet paper packs as a makeshift backrest. I flicked the breaker again to kill the last of the interior aisle lights. The store went to night mode fully, lit only by LEDs too small to see from the lot. Outside, the steps on gravel multiplied, then settled. I could picture them out there without wanting to. A dozen at least, maybe more, arranged without a logic our instincts trusted. At 2:03 a.m., the radio voice changed again. The script moved one step closer to telling the truth. Local authorities advise that individuals affected by the current outbreak may attempt to gain entry to homes and businesses. Do not attempt to interact physically. If safe to do so, avoid drawing attention with lights, noise, or movement. Close and secure all doors and windows. Consider sheltering away from ground-level windows. I looked at the stockroom door, solid wood in a metal frame, and at the walk-in cooler door, metal and insulation thick enough that you had to pull hard to latch it. I thought about the term shelter away from ground-level windows. I thought about the fact that our store was almost entirely ground-level windows, or at least it had been until we taped and shuttered it. "We can use the cooler as a safe room if we have to," I said. "It's big enough for all of us for a while. It seals." "The latch locks from the inside," Jess said, nodding. "Ventilation?" Kara asked immediately, and my estimation of her rose again. "It's not designed for people," I said, "but it's not airtight. There's a fresh air exchange whenever the compressor cycles. We bar the shutter, we stack, we hold. We don't go in there unless we have to." "What about the truck?" Kara asked, glancing at Derek. "Could we all get in and drive away?" Derek's jaw muscles worked for a second. He knew what we were all thinking. The noise, the visibility, the fact that every reflective stripe on that tractor would flash like a signal tower when the lights hit it. "We could," he said, measured. "But if you've seen the highway, you know it's a dice roll, and starting her up will be a beacon. If we go once. I don't like our odds at 2:30 in the morning with folks wandering the shoulder." Kara nodded, like she'd already had the argument with herself. "So, we stay." "For now," I said. We settled into a rhythm again. Derek and I rotated at the shutter. Jess and Kara organized supplies in the stockroom like a grocery store in a power cut, grouping cans we could open with the pull tabs, setting the manual opener next to the ones that needed it. Liam, being the age he was, took tasks as we offered them, stacking water into a tidy pyramid, counting batteries, testing flashlights. He did it with a gravity that made me want to pat his shoulder and tell him he was doing great, and also made me want to lock him in the cooler and invent for him a world where he could sleep without the sound of gravel steps outside a shutter. Derek went still after an hour in a way I didn't like. Heat radiated off him as if he'd been standing in sunshine in a room with no windows. He didn't say anything. He didn't complain. He just rolled his neck once more often than necessary and swallowed before he spoke like his throat was too dry, even though he'd just had water. He caught my eye, saw my concern, and shrugged with a little smile that had more apology in it than humor. "I'm good," he said, and we both chose to believe him because believing otherwise would have pressed us toward decisions we weren't equipped to make. At 3:21 a.m., we heard a different sound. Not footsteps, not a horn. The distant, rising fall of an engine running just above idle, big displacement, in a gear too low for cruising. Headlights rolled down the highway slow, not the jittery search pattern of a panicked driver, but the deliberate sweep of a vehicle with a job. The lights approached. They were too high for a sedan. A pair of red and blue flashes swept once across the tree line, not on full, not trying to announce, just flicking like a man touching an old scar to make sure it's still there. We crouched by the shutter and didn't breathe. The engine slowed more. Gravel popped at the edge of our lot. The vehicle paused. It idled. It moved on, slow, steady, and then the sound faded the way it had arrived. I didn't let out the breath until I couldn't keep from it. "Sheriff," Jess said. "They're doing loops," Derek said. "Looking, not stopping. They know now what we know. If you stop and knock, you bring the world with you." I didn't say it, that I was glad they didn't stop, because if they had, we might have opened the shutter, and if we had opened the shutter, we would have been back to the same calculus, only now with a new shape in the doorway and the herd pressing in behind. At 4:05 a.m., the coolers cycled and the compressor kicked in, and for 30 seconds our store sounded like a machine again, normal and alive. Then the compressor shut off and the hush rushed back harder. At 4:42 a.m., the man in the men's room fell silent. The small shuffles and slaps against tile we'd learned to ignore became a quiet that was its own sound. We looked at the door together and did what people do. We looked away. There was nothing we could do to change that situation, and that logic was both a lifeline and a weight. At 5:13 a.m., an impact hit the shutter hard enough to ripple the slats and throw dust from the top bar. Not a punch, not a person at the edge of their strength. A vehicle, a bumper, a low-speed, confused impact like a car in neutral rolling and tapping. We flinched hard enough that the office chair skated an inch. Derek hissed. I rolled to the crank before I even thought about it, then stopped my own hand like it had found a hot stovetop. I dropped to a knee and peered under the half-inch of gap at the bottom of the shutter. I saw dark rubber inches from my face. A tire. The tread was full of gravel. A weight shifted in the car above, and then the vehicle rolled back 6 inches as if someone had stepped off a brake. "Someone's in the driver's seat," I whispered. "Don't open," Jess said from behind me, a hand on my shoulder. "Whatever you do, don't open for a car pressed to the door. We didn't. The car rocked again and then stopped. The engine didn't run. The car didn't drive away. Whoever was inside either didn't decide, or could no longer decide anything at all. At 5:58 a.m., light began to collect at the horizon, a blue-gray like the inside of a seashell. We stood at the shutter and watched day build in tiny increments. The herd outside didn't drift off like animals do when the sun comes up. They stayed. They didn't react to color temperature, or remember that they had once slept when the sky was this color. They waited the way a magnet waits on a fridge door. "We can't sit like this all day," Kara said quietly. "They'll gather. Word will spread without words." "We need to choose," Derek said, voice a notch lower, a notch rougher. "Make a move or make a stand." He didn't say the part in both options that involved him. He didn't have to. The hot, tight look around his eyes said it for him. I did the math nobody wanted to hear. If the thing that had taken the man in our men's room was in Derek now, the clock was ticking. If it wasn't, we had time. If it was, we had an obligation to him and to each other to be human and to be practical, and those two words were on a collision course. "Options," I said. And the word steadied me because it was the word we used when the power blinked in a storm, and when the soda delivery arrived late, and when the state inspector stopped by unannounced. It implied a list, and lists are things you can hold in your hand. "Option A," Jess said, picking up the thread with me because she'd been making lists since the minute she walked in the store. "We take the semi. We use its mass and height to move through obstacles. We accept that we're a beacon, but we bet on speed and momentum. We put everyone who can climb in the cab, people in the sleeper if they must. We keep to the back road for a few miles and then cut into the county lanes. No towns. We go to the small airstrip or the farm co-op. We look for a building with limited entries." "Option B," I said. "We stay. We finish turning this place into a ship in a storm. We move food to the stockroom. We reinforce the shutter. We use the cooler as a last-ditch shelter inside the shelter. We turn off everything that emits light. We ration. We keep the radio on a whisper and listen." "Option C," Kara said, and I realized she belonged in this kind of conversation far more than me. We split. One driver takes the noisy vehicle as a lure down the old quarry road to draw attention away. The rest move on foot through the drainage easement behind the store to the tree line, and then to the abandoned farmhouse 2 pastures over and hole up there. We reunite at the silo if we can. "Splitting is risk," Derek said evenly. "Lure is risk, noise is risk, everything's risk." He pushed his palm across his thigh where the bandage sat, and for a second the mask slipped and I saw a flash of heat behind his measured voice. He caught me seeing it, and he straightened his cap like a man who just remembered he was on camera and wanted to look presentable. "What do you want, Derek?" I asked softly. He swallowed. The answer landed without ornament. "I want to get you all out," he said. "And then I want to find a quiet place to sit and see which way I go." The room was very still. The sound of someone's breath caught, and it took me a second to recognize it as my own. "Then we go," I said. "We take the truck, we do it clean. We have one chance, and we are going to spend it well." We moved. There's a different speed you find when you've made a choice like that. It isn't panic, it's clarity, a grease in the gears. I assigned jobs, and the jobs were good ones because they were small and had ends. Kara and Jess packed food in tote bags and left the heavy canned stuff for last in case we had to drop and run. Liam tasked himself with batteries and flashlights and did not forget the headlamps. Derek took the CB, the first aid kit, and a length of rope from the closet and looped it twice around his wrist. I grabbed the keys to the semi from Derek's jacket because he handed them to me in a motion that said he didn't want to think about starting that engine for what might be the last time. We worked the backdoor plan again with the knock pattern, only this time we opened to go out, not in. We staged at the threshold. I tested my grip on the bat, then put it aside because it wouldn't help once we were in the cab. I took the fire extinguisher instead, the ABC unit, because I'd seen a person use one once like a defensive tool to create space, propellant and powder cloud to buy seconds. I put it on the floor by the bolt. We do this in 3 motions, I said. 1. Unlock, open, and go out. 2. Derek starts the tractor. 3. We load, Jess and Liam, then Kara, then me. We close and lock. If something interrupts, we abort and go to the cooler. Everyone understands. Nods all around, serious and small. And the front? Kara said, with the quiet terror of a person asking if we were leaving anyone behind. I met her eyes. We can't, I said. We can't open that. It was a sentence in a foreign language that tasted like metal. She nodded because she understood all the words, even though none of them were any good. We went. The bolt slid. The door opened. Autumn air rushed the stockroom like a wave. Gravel underfoot. The semi loomed to the left, white letters dull in the dawn. Shapes turned in the lot by the shutter, heads lifting at the motion. Not a shout, not a roar, just motion, and then more motion, as if our world had been a calm pond and someone had thrown a net into it. Derek moved. He took 3 quick steps, then 5, then hit the running board and grabbed the handle with a fluidity that told you every hour he had ever spent with this machine. He pulled himself into the driver's seat. The door shut, the cab light clicked. For half a second I saw him through the glass, hands find positions. Key, switch, wait for glow plugs to clear, foot on the brake, another key twist. The engine caught. The sound punched the air like the backbeat at a concert. It was exactly as loud as we knew it would be, and the herd outside the shutter reacted like metal filings to a charged magnet. They pivoted, feet finding speed that made my spine ice. The first 3 came straight for the sound, legs high, arms like swimmers. The others fanned and found the motion and converged. The cab shook as the big diesel spun up to idle, and then up again as Derek feathered the throttle. He dropped the selector into a low gear with a hard, clean motion and eased off the brake. Now, I said, and it was softer than I meant it to be, but it carried. Jess moved first, grabbing Liam's hand and sprinting low. They reached the passenger side steps. I was already there, swinging the door open and catching Jess's elbow to steady her as she climbed. Liam moved like a cat, small and quick, his backpack jerking on his shoulders. Kara followed, eyes on the steps, body coiled. She grabbed the handle. I boosted at her waist, not pushing, just giving her enough to make the reach. She got herself in, twisted, and yanked. The passenger door swung down and caught me across the shoulder, a solid thump that I didn't feel until later. I pushed in behind them and reached for the strap to pull the door shut. A hand closed on the bottom of the door and held it open. Not a human hand negotiating, not a neighbor saying, wait. A grip like a car jack under a bumper. The door stopped 2 inches short. For a second, the world compressed into that 2-inch gap. Skin, metal, tendon, leverage. I slammed my hip into the door. Jess threw her shoulder in with me. The door moved half an inch. The hand adjusted. A hiss sounded, and then a roar, and then a white cloud exploded into the gap as Kara yanked the fire extinguisher pin with one hand and shoved the nozzle hard with the other. The powder filled the wedge like a storm. The hand jerked reflexively. I threw my weight into the door and it slammed with a sound like a chest being closed. I reached for the lock and found it with my palm. The click was a tiny sound and the most important one of the night. "Seat belts," Derek said, voice like a chain dragging on concrete. "Now." We snapped in. Derek gave the engine enough throttle to lift the front end a fraction and then eased the clutch out. The tractor rolled. The first bodies hit the bumper and glanced aside with the benign, stomach-twisting horror of physics. We crushed no one by design. It was just mass meeting mass at low speed and the smaller losing the argument. The trailer followed. The ladder on the fence graped a metal scream. We turned to the wheel, and the tractor took the angle we demanded, slow and inexorable. The herd peeled and reformatted. They came from the side now, from the pump island, from behind the dumpster. One hit the angled side mirror, and it snapped on its hinge and swung, and then, after a beat, settled back into place. The engine sounded like a heartbeat amplified through an aircraft hangar. "Nate," Derek said, and his tone was a hand on my shoulder more than a word. "Left." I looked left. The propane cage, the chain. The memory of another night when a customer had slammed a cylinder into the frame and I had pictured how the day could go wrong. "Wide," I said softly. "Take it wide." He did. The truck swung in a wide arc that cut the corner and left the propane cage untouched. The back wheels grabbed gravel and bit down. The trailer followed. The sound it made when the tires found pavement felt like a lifeline thrown from a boat. We rolled onto the highway. We didn't go fast. Derek kept it at a speed that was less than you'd want for escaping and more than you'd want for safety. We passed a sedan angled into the ditch with the driver's side door open and the seat empty. We passed a pickup with its headlights on and no one behind the wheel. We passed the county sign. The sky lightened in slow degrees until the trees were black cutouts against a blue that said morning was real. "No towns," Derek said, as if giving himself instruction, as if the road were always an impulse to point towards people and we were having to learn how to be the opposite of that. "No towns," I said back, anchoring him. We took the farm road that paralleled the creek instead of the main line. It wound. It had single-lane bridges with weight limits marked in chipped paint. It had mailbox clusters like dominoes. It also had fewer cars and fewer reasons for anyone to be walking. We could see a long way down its length, and the length looked empty. "There's a grain co-op 10 miles up," I said. "Metal silos, tin warehouse, a single entry gate with a heavy chain. I did a delivery there once when our vending machine supplier broke their route. It's open ground and not cozy, but it's got water and a break room and a place to park a tractor where it could be shielded from the road." "Sounds like a plan," Jess said. We drove. The radio on the dash stayed off. The CB muttered once and fell silent. Derek's face furrowed and sweat beaded on his neck in a way that made me count the mile markers. Every quarter mile we covered was one more step away from the cluster at our shutter. Every quarter mile we covered was one more step toward the moment we'd have to check in with the man behind the wheel and ask him to inventory more than supplies. We reached the co-op gate. It was chained, but not with malice. The chain was a keep honest, people honest chain, looped through a pipe gate and secured with a lock you could cut with the bolt cutters we'd brought. I hopped down, boots hitting dirt, air cool and sharp. I reached for the cutters. I looked both ways on the empty road because training never leaves you, then bent and snipped the chain with 2 quick squeezes. We pulled in. The yard opened up on crushed gravel that had not seen a broom in years. The silos stood like bright moons, round and tall, with catwalks looping between them. The warehouse door sat on tracks. We could open it half the way and bring the tractor in nose first, use the wall as a shield, drop the door just enough that someone would have to crawl to enter. We could live here for a day or two, long enough to survey the situation and listen on a battery radio. It would not be forever. It would be the next thing. We parked with the nose just past the threshold and the trailer angled so the opening pointed at a corner where a person would have to break lines of sight twice to reach us. We killed the engine. The sudden quiet pressed like a pillow. The five of us sat and listened to the sound of big machines ticking as they cooled. Jess touched my arm and pointed to Derek's hands on the wheel. The knuckles were white. The tips of his fingers had a slight tremor. It could have been adrenaline. It could have been anything. "Let's get inside," I said. "Close the door, water, then we talk." We made our camp in the office of the co-op, a room with a calendar from 2 years ago and a fan that didn't turn. There was a bathroom with a sink that worked, and a roll of paper towels turned gray with dust. The break room had a microwave that we didn't plug in, and a table with someone's name carved into the wood. We stacked our food. We set water within reach. We put the first aid kit in the center like a centerpiece. Derek sat on the edge of the table and looked at his hands like he needed them to tell him what they intended to do. He took off his cap and rubbed his scalp once, slow. "Nate," he said, "I want to be clear. If you see me go wrong, you close that door and you don't look back." "No," Kara said, too fast, too loud. "We're not." He held up a hand and she stopped. Not because he had authority over her, because he had the right to ask for what he asked. "You don't have to decide it now," I said, buying us a minute. "You're here, we're here. We'll watch, we'll pay attention, we'll be honest." He nodded. "Fair enough." We set watches again, and because we were people with a dangerous tendency to seek normalcy, we set tasks too. Jess found a marker and drew a map of the co-op on a legal pad, rough but functional, and marked entry points and blind corners and distances. Liam took the headlamp and explored the perimeter of the office under my eye, counting steps between doors like a surveyor. Kara took inventory of what the co-op had left behind. Sacks of seed, rolls of plastic sheeting, a half-full drum of hand soap that would outlast us all. I fixed a door latch with Derek's crowbar and a sheet metal screw. It was nothing and everything. The morning built. We heard one car all the way out on the road sometime after 8 and didn't go to the window. The air warmed just enough to bake the dust trapped in the office carpet. I looked at the clock and found that time was still going forward, even in a world that had forgotten how to keep it. Around noon, Derek stood stretched and swayed just one step. I caught him on reflex. His skin felt too hot. He smiled like a man apologizing for a spill he hadn't meant to make and then shook his head once. "Time," he said softly, to me and not to the room. We walked together to the truck. He climbed into the sleeper with his usual care, setting his boots neatly side by side as if order could be a talisman. He looked out at me from the shadow of the curtain. "If I sleep and I wake up wrong," he said, "you know what to do." I did, and I hated that I did, and I loved him for trusting me with it. "You might just sleep and wake up tired," I said. "Maybe," he said. He closed the curtain. I stood there, a man in a quiet agricultural warehouse that wasn't mine, listening to the world for sounds it wasn't making. Jess came and stood next to me without touching me, and that helped. Kara and Liam were back in the office, making a lunch out of crackers and peanut butter and sliced peaches from a can, eating like astronauts, discreet, neat, methodical. I told myself we were safe for the hour. I told myself I would listen every minute for a sound from the sleeper that meant I needed to move. I told myself I would be the person he had asked me to be. When the first thump came from inside the sleeper, it was soft, like a hand brushing the wall. The second came 5 seconds later and was not soft. It was the sound of a body forgetting how to fit in a space it had chosen. I didn't have to choose which option anymore. The option had chosen me. I put my hand on the handle to the sleeper, closed my eyes for 1 second because a man deserves as much respect as that, and then opened the handle and did the job I had promised him I would do, Not with cruelty, not with spectacle, not with words that would get a video flagged, but with the clean, quiet choice of a friend honoring another friend's last good instruction. When it was done, I sat on the concrete next to the tractor and put my hands flat on the floor and let the cold creep into my palms until it made me pull them back. Jess stood a little distance away and watched the horizon like she could pick me up if I listed. Kara stood in the office doorway with Liam behind her and didn't say anything. The silence was work we all did together. I do not know what the town looked like at that hour. I do not know how many people stood at the shutter we had left. I do not know if the man in our men's room ever made another sound. What I do know is that the co-op felt like a place at the edge of water, and that we were four in a small boat with our friend's Cap on the seat beside us. We set a place for Derek when we ate that evening. We didn't speak over it. We sat until the light changed to the special hour that makes metal look warm. Then we cleared our plates because food is not free, and we made a new watch schedule, and I took first watch with the CB turned to low and the radio turned to a murmur. The broadcast at dusk said, "Remain indoors and avoid travel after dark," and then assistance will be deployed when conditions permit. It said nothing about names. It could not have. That part was our job. We held the co-op through the night. When a set of lights rolled by on the road at 2 a.m, we crouched and watched the beam paint the wall and pass. When a fox trotted across the yard with something in its mouth at dawn, I watched it and felt something like relief that any animal could be doing anything that normal. On day 3, the CB spat out a few more words than usual. A voice said, "If you're at the old co-op, folks are consolidating at the feed store by mile 8. They have a generator and a fair stack of animal feed that might as well be human food in a pinch." The voice did not identify itself. The voice did not make promises. It offered a waypoint. In a world where everything was edges, that was a center. We looked at one another. Kara folded the map. Liam straightened the water stack. Jess pulled her hair back tight like someone getting ready for a long run. I checked the oil in the tractor and felt the echo of a man looking over my shoulder in my mind and telling me where I'd missed a smear. I didn't cry then. I'm not sure why. Maybe because the next thing was too big to carry tears and bags and hold the wheel at the same time. We drove at noon toward mile 8, in a world where the rules had changed, but the roads were still the roads, and we used the station we'd left behind as the first line in a story we were still writing whether we wanted to be writers or not. We did not ruin the memory of that little store by going back. We honored it by making it not the end. I keep the sticky note in my pocket. It is creased and faded and illegible now, but I know what it says. It says we made a rule for ourselves in a small hallway in a rural store, and we kept it. It says we became our own authorities when the radio voice could only be a voice. It says that sometimes a fortress is a place, and sometimes it's a plan held between 3 people by the light of a cooler. It says that a trap is only a trap until you decide it's a launch point. We survived the first broadcast. We survived the first night. We lost a friend and did right by him. We found a next place. That is the whole list, and it is more than enough for one chapter of a longer story I would not have chosen, but am choosing day by day to tell. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.